if there were one word to describe the loving leader, it is that illuminator who can see the gifts in people and fan their flames into purpose and growth.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is The Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. We're teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, at home, and the world at large. I'm Amy Woodall, and you're listening to the Conscious Habit Podcast. Today, my dear friend, Deseri Garcia, the founder of Vida Aventura, joins me as co-host. Together, we host the High Vibe Tribe retreats. We founded these retreats to have magical, transformational experiences for women in the highest vibe places around the world. And this new co-hosted series with Des and me is really intended to share more of our collective consciousness work to help you take a deep dive inside yourself and to elevate your vibe and your experience on this planet. Take a listen. Hey, Conscious Habit listeners, I am here with Deseri Garcia, and we are so stoked about our interview and our guest today. Our guest, Jasmine Bellamy, came to us from none other than Nikki Llewellyn, the founder of People Forward Network, where you are listening to our show right now. Nikki had a meeting with Jasmine, and I think within 3.2 seconds of hanging up from that meeting, we had a speed text. It's like, you got to meet this chick. And by the way, that is a sign of love from Miss Nikki Gregory. By the way, I might have said Llewellyn, but that's a slip of the tongue. I'm so used to that. Nikki Gregory. Sorry, David. And so, Jasmine, welcome to the Conscious Habit Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here and excited for what's about to happen.
We are too. And I have to say, when we get those speed texts from Nikki, we always answer the call because it's like, okay, so we know when we know. So I'm so glad you're with us today. So I'm going to start off with a question that we ask our guests, and that is, what is conscious leadership? What does conscious leadership mean to you?
As you say that, I immediately think of the opposite would be the unconscious things that we always do without thinking, so I can't think of the one without the other. So I would use words like mindfulness in terms of being present and aware of not necessarily just our context and the people around us, but what's going on with us. And that's, I think, the sweet spot that I've been leaning into a lot lately is really helping leaders become much more aware of themselves. And that part, I think, is what conscious leadership is really all about for me.
And that truly is where it starts. It has to start with us. You truly can't reflect out what it is that you're wanting to get and give without it starting at home. So I love your definition of that. So Jasmine, give us some context. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, it's such a journey that I never planned. There's no way I could have told you I'd be here now. Never in a million years. But I would, if I literally start off at the beginning point of my 31-year career in retail, I started out as, graduating out of college, having had a great internship, knew I wanted to be a buyer eventually, and just being a part of all of the types of training programs that would allow you to be technically excellent, that your craft and you know how to do it well. And I was actually just talking about this earlier today. But for me, I could look at my resume and be very much traumatized and triggered because of the very bumpy road that I've experienced on that journey. And so if I also kind of put that parallel to my personal life, I was married for 22 years. I'm now divorced and very happily divorced. I share that from the perspective of I was all about doing all the things that you're supposed to be to be successful. All the things you check off the box to say that you're successful. I was married at 24, moved to the suburbs, bought a big house, had beautiful kids in private school, all the things, the great jobs and all of that stuff that people define as really successful. And, about 7 years ago, well, really more than 7 years ago, but 7 years ago was kind of the culminating event. I realized that this is not meaningful. Like something, like I found myself in a space where that was unloving. And it was a long journey to that end. It was a very thoughtful process. If I was married 22, 11 of it was toward the, pointing my way that maybe this wasn't going to work out. But I'm sharing all of that because all of these things were going on at the same time. A volatile career in an industry that has been imploding on itself in a city of New York that's got all the energy in the world and everybody wants to make it big and, all the things. And also visually from the outside, successful, loving my kids, having a ball with them, but at the same time saying there's something missing here. There's meaning and purpose that isn't happening here, and just having that hunger to become a seeker for that. And so I remember shortly after I literally picked myself up and my kids moved to a whole nother house. And I remember being like, surrounded by boxes and standing in my closet one day and hearing so clearly, there is love that you've yet to understand. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I'm down with that. And then it wasn't until a few months later, the next kind of prompt came. And it was, have you really thought about it, what it would look like to live a life of love? And I remember being like, how, as my kids will say in my big old age, had I ever never thought about that? Like I never considered what it would be like to live a life of love. I'm like, how has that question never come to me beforehand? How have I never heard anyone say that before? This is crazy. And I became Love's student. And so as I became Love's student, I really started to redefine what love is, what it looks like to live a life of love. And I started cultivating what I call a love practice. At the same time, I was starting a meditation practice. I literally had been practicing yoga since a baby, like literally. And so it was like, okay, let's go back to that. So I was doing both of these things at the same time. And so, whether it's, my brain used to ruminate, like everybody, but I would feel like, I don't know how I'm going to be good at meditating, all the things that I'm sure you hear all the time, Amy. And I remember reflecting one day, like, when it's you and your mat or your cushion, you're only working with you. Like you can be the one that says, "Come on, let's push through the tension of holding this pose. Like, let's not run from it. Let's not retract. Let's lean in and allow ourselves to rest in it." Or on the cushion saying, "Okay, let me count my breaths one more time, even though my mind just tripped to some other place." It occurred to me one day that love is also a practice. That same begin again, that same tension, the difference is that you're doing it interdependently, that you are not working this thing out on your own. And that's actually what makes it so incredibly complex. And so as I was creating this love practice, and that's when I had the revelation that love is a practice. It's also a practice. We could talk about that later. But this idea of I can begin again, that I've got to understand where I end and somebody else begins, right? All of these things, and how do we do this dance? So as my own personal life was transforming, I could see my family life transforming. And then it became so really clear to me that this is not about you. It is also about you transforming your context. And so I then all of a sudden was showing up to work as a love practitioner. And that's really when it started to happen. I came to work. I was hired by a sponsor. So a person who I trusted with my career and who trusted me, and so I was able to come to work fully myself. And so that loving person was actually showing up and becoming the loving leader. And so it's been a lot of bumps, but it's also been a lot of resilience, and it's also the naming that something is missing to being a seeker, and then committing to all of this inner work that I could then show up to work as my full self. And that's what's transformed everything. I wouldn't be here literally talking to two of you now if it weren't for that journey. A colleague of mine once said, like, you are experiencing convergence, that I am fully myself in every space. It doesn't matter what it is. There's no bifurcating of self. And so what I understood is that is when my power was truly unleashed.
That is the authenticity registers at the highest vibration, even higher than love, because that's when we're the full expression of our unique self, right? Of what, from which we came, whatever your personal beliefs are. We know that those beliefs are always so personal to folks. So we try to touch on it in the broadest perspective as possible. But I love your journey is so interesting, and everyone's journey is so interesting. When we look back, sometimes we find that people are on that journey and they have their awakening, and then they're like, I'm a stranger to this life. But it sounds like your awakening was beaconing for you to say, there's more for you to learn and you can't do it here. And so the pain, Des just posted a video about this, about when do you know it's time to leave. But this, idea that like it became probably more painful to stay and who you had to become to stay than who you were capable of becoming upon leaving.
And can I just add, for me too, I also was clear of what messages I was sending into my children. It was fine, and to some degree, right? But I was more concerned about my children, who are now 20 and 17, believing what they were witnessing was love. Like, that to me was, it became real clear, like, you've got to be responsible, because you can't set these kids up to believe that what they are witnessing is actually a loving union. And that was one of the things for me, that usually people see it the other way and go, oh, I got to stay together with the kids. Not if the kids don't see love, because then you are doing them no service. I just wanted to add that piece, because that was a really important part of the awakening, for sure.
I love that you added that, Jasmine. As someone who doesn't have children, in observation of my female and male friends who are parents, I don't think I've witnessed a more powerful catalyst for change than your kids. Yeah, I mean, you use the word beacon, Amy, being a beacon for, ooh, I got to walk my talk, or I got to make this change, or it's to me very powerful to witness.
And brave to do, because it's the scary thing, right? It's scary to choose yourself, but it's also the most honoring thing, because if we betray ourselves, we betray this one precious life that we get. This love, can we dig into this love thing? Because Des and I are like this too. I have a motto in life that is love. I put that shit on everything. And my own realization is I can only love my life equal to the way I love myself. And so what in your own love practice, what were some of those pieces you had to learn to love in you? And how did you get there?
So first, I want to just frame up that I see the love practice as the intentional ordering of my life around love. So I'm very intentional in putting it into practice, right? So that's kind of, I wanted to start with that place. I do believe that for me, it starts with self love. And I believe when you start with self love, love of creator, whatever that is for you, those things start to speak to each other in a way. And then once for me, as I was kind of refashioned to really understand the purity of what love is, I often also say that many things that we say are love aren't, when we take our cues from culture. So when we really get to what love really is, then for me, then it became this love of other too. So it's this trinity of, love of myself, love of creator, love of people for me that drives me. There were so many lessons to learn in that journey. Many, I would say, oftentimes I've said the hardest ones have been surrender, because as a businesswoman that is type A, driving to all kinds of outcomes and conclusions, to not have an outcome or conclusion, but to just show up and bring you and your gifts to the table with no, like, wherever it goes, it goes. But I don't have to manipulate to get to some outcome anymore. So surrender was an absolute huge one. I've shared in the past that I'm a former codependent and a reform fixer. And so not doing that was real hard. I've had narcissism kind of all around me forever to be, it's so normalized, as scary as that might be. And it becomes so normalized, you don't realize that it's actually problematic. And so, until you really become broken by it. And then you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So to unlearn that pattern of codependency is huge. And then even from a cultural perspective, that fixing, being everybody's answer, solving everybody's problem is unhealthily connected to value. And so to start to disentangle that was also really important. And I would say the other major piece for me is I've always been an extrovert, always. And I am such the introvert now. And that shift into solitude to me has been so incredibly life-giving. And that doesn't mean that my kids joke and say I'm a hermit, but I'm not really. But I love me and my books. I'm addicted to books. So I just love learning and in podcasts. I'm a junkie. Like, I just love all of that stuff and being in conversation with it. And so solitude gives me all the time in the world to do those things, and also though, I've had these beautiful invitations to community because what I know to be true is love is relational. And so it can't just be me and creator in my books having a love relationship. It requires others. And so I've been really intentional for the past like 3.5 years of building communities that I can flourish in now based on, as a point you said earlier, Amy, about where you don't fit anymore anywhere. And then I think that's part of the isolation for me. I was so committed to practicing love. I was so committed to transforming my life from the inside out. I was so locked in that I didn't care what anybody else thought. So the idea of relinquishing any external power over my life has been hugely transformative. So these are all the things that I kind of had to wrestle with to get into this practice of love. But it all came about loving who I am and valuing the gift that I am, understanding there's just such a beautiful purpose in me. I literally sit in humility and I am in awe and humbled that I have been crafted in a way to show up as love.
Ladies, imagine taking time away to work on you. Meditation, yoga, transformational work, a chance to have grand adventures and build lasting relationships. Deseri Garcia and I founded High Vibe Tribe Retreats to create just that. And if you're curious about joining us on our next retreat, head over to highvibetriberetreat.com, link in the show notes.
I'm curious. I'm gonna ask a tactical question, but what's been the time frame of your journey? I'm just really curious about that because there's such an evolution that you've described, and from that message, the epiphany, to where you are today.
So 2017 was when I got the first nudge about there being this greater calling toward love. 2018 was the invitation to consider what it is to live a life of love. And that's when I became Love Student. And so 6 years since then, I've been on this journey of cultivating a love practice. 2019 is when I kind of went public and started doing the work of love because I realized it wasn't about my life. It was also how to, offering people an invitation as well. And so 2019, I started to go public. So my beloved community has been in existence since 2020 and started my first live webinars, holding space for people. And then 2020 was also transformative from a leadership perspective, because that's when I was asked to lead United Against Racism Change Management after the murder of George Floyd. So that was the invitation of me coming into work as this courageous leader and creating a platform called Courageous Conversations for us to really wrestle in the tension. And I only intended to do 6 of those and did 23. And 2022 really started to think about what it would look like to do more regular work with the people in our beloved community. So I have a monthly communal practice that is live once a month. And I also repurpose it as a podcast. And so we are up to season 2, episode 7, that aired last night, called to Love Experience. And so that's kind of, in between there, I got a master's of arts in theology, and and now I in fall of 23 started doctoral work as for a doctorate in global leadership, where my focus will really be on love and the redemptive imagination of the marketplace. So that's like, those are the big moments from 2017 until now.
Oh my goodness. I have to like really even think about like the redemptive power of love in the marketplace. I'm like, So that leads me to another question. I read, one of the articles that you wrote, and in it you talked about inner life and spiritual growth being a catalyst for transformation from a strong manager of people to a loving leader. And I'm very curious about what's that reflection of now versus back then.
That's such a good question. Part of the reason why I wrote that in that article was, if you were to look back to my reviews, you know, it would always say I was excellent at managing people. But I know that I was materially different when I became a loving leader. And it was on the other side of all of that transformational work. And I think for me, like, I was really good at assessing people's skills and helping them see where there were opportunities to grow and giving them the space for that. Like, I would always see myself as an empowering leader in that sense. Like, I was not a micromanager or anything like that. So there was that very practical element of what it is to be a leader. And I think I did that really well for the majority of my career. What I know that is different about me now is that I look at the humans that are in front of me, and that I'm constantly almost surveying that space that I'm in with them, and noticing, not, I don't want to say from an engagement perspective, like it has to look a thing, but what might be holding someone back, and what might it look like to offer an invitation that they would welcome. So that means you've got to understand the individuals to be able to do that. I spent a lot of one-on-one time, not just with my direct reports, but their teams as well. And I'm getting to know people's stories. I'm getting to understand what drives them, what interests them, so that when I'm in a board meeting and there's opportunities that are coming up, I'm thinking about these people because I remember their stories. And so I think the big thing is just, one of my direct reports said the other day, you created calm so that we could be focused on the task at hand, that we could be thoughtful about the things that we needed to do. We could articulate maybe pros and cons and challenges and all those things. but you gave us calm so we could do that. And those are the kinds of things when in business, like, we need it now, we needed it yesterday, for them to not feel fear. And that to me is one of if there was an objective of mine or a conclusion I was trying to drive to, it is to drive out fear in the marketplace. And so, what does it look like to lead in a way that is not predicated on my title, that I get to laud it over people, or that is based in fear, but creates us as partners and co-creators, and that brings the best out of all of us, all the blind spots that we don't think we have, but somebody else can really speak into that, and that literally that synergy that produces value creation beyond what we could ever do on our own. That's the difference. That's the difference. And it doesn't have to be people who are like me. It doesn't have to be people who think like me. It doesn't have to be people like one of my most cherished stories as a leader. We were having a small group discussion with my team. This was a part of it was our commitment to spend like during the business day, but not doing business, like spending time with each other. Like recently, I took my team to play pickleball during the Christmas time, but we were in this session and we were talking about what it is to be introverted and extroverted. And I have members on my team who are like painfully introverted, and they were under the impression that they couldn't be successful, like that they couldn't grow because they were introverted. And I remember one of them sending me a note later saying, "No one has ever told me that I could be a leader as an introvert." And I promoted that person twice. They were counting themselves out, almost seeing who they were as a handicap, and it helped get her to feel safe and comfortable and free to be exactly who she is, and then watch her thrive, right? And fan her flame. And so, if I think about the common, things that are happening in culture, I think of David Brooks' book, where he talks about being an illuminator. And that to me is if there were one word to describe the loving leader, it is that illuminator who can see the gifts in people and fan their flames into purpose and growth.
If there is, I mean, speaking directly to the audience, we've got plenty of leaders who are listening. And I always say it's a mindset. I think even more so than a title, because you can have a title and not show up as a leader, but let's add loving leader, putting those two things together. Are there some questions that come to mind that they might be able to ask themselves that allow them to just be able to step into that place of being a more loving leader, being reflective of like, am I operating with love? Do I have a good love practice? Are there some questions that they might reflect upon for themselves?
I want to first add, I think I coined this term, right? I'd like to call it a heart set even more than a mindset. I actually see the loving leader as meta emotional intelligence, that it goes past the thinking piece. And there's a lot of reasons about that. One, a study that talks about the fact that many of the skills that we've learned in management, they operate or they stimulate the task positive part in our brains, and when that is actually happening, the relational part of our brains are actually suppressed. And so almost everything that we've been taught to do, everything, even the case studies on human resources, they are all activating the task positive part of our brain and depressing or suppressing the relational aspect of our brain. And so really great leaders are the ones who can move between the task positive and the relational at the same time. And so the naming of that, to understand that we are likely operating in our head, that awareness, being conscious of that is so important. But I will say, in terms of a framework that I use for the loving leader, I literally use each letter of loving as almost a cue And I'm using it as a framework for folks to, because I get this question all the time, like, I don't even know what you mean. What does it look like to show up as a loving leader? So for L, I start with listen. Listen is the first act or the first duty of love, as Paul Tillich would say. And I also will add look again, which is the etymology of the word respect. That to take that second look, knowing that there's all kinds of bias that we probably brought to the table when we looked the first time. So to look again. So those are the L's. The O generally is open, open hearted, open minded, open to change. I love the impact of storytelling, in that I allow myself to be changed by being open to someone else's story. So I think open is a huge one. How open are you? Are you feeling resistance in your body to something? And what would it be like to literally breathe into that and open up? I have too many V's. Well, actually, no, too many I's. I'll give you two V's. I have a lot of I's. V, value. And also the value meaning the value of the human person, that we can really honor the giftedness in another person is a big one. But when we're talking about being vulnerable or open, vulnerable comes right with that. So that's my other big V, and that's again very countercultural to the marketplace. That we're in a place where we want to be dominant. That this is about being vulnerable to others. Inner work, back to the article that you mentioned. So doing our own inner work, also understanding that this is an interdependent process, that it is not the individual like we would like to say in our culture, but it is about the interdependence of being knitted into a community. It also is illuminator, as I was saying. Those are some of the eyes. I've got 100 more, but let's just leave with those for the moment. And then N, nurture, that being able to look at another human and have that desire not to look at them as an object but a subject, and to really be able to nurture the goodness in them becomes really, really critical. And then I would offer the G again as the gift, the goodness of people. Like, are we tuned into that? Are we sensing that? Are we looking for that? And I think those help us as a guide. And so to be able to just think of the letters of the word loving, and it's almost like your own introspection, another I see, right? Like to be able to ask myself, am I doing that with these people? But I think that the most important thing is to it's really being focused on the flourishing of all. And what does it look like to honor the humanity of those that you are in contact with?
Yeah, this is such a powerful framework. I love that it's behaviorally based, right? And you can take your own pulse check on it, right? Like I can measure myself and know where am I at any point.
Oh, Jasmine, I thank you for just hanging out with us and sharing your insight and your wisdom. And I can't wait to just stay connected to all of the things that you're doing. And we've got to stay connected because we're also like-hearted in our missions in the world of, like, can we just get people to love each other? Damn it. But us first, us first. Gosh, can you share with the listeners where they can find you? How do they best connect with you?
Yeah, given your audience, I would definitely say LinkedIn for sure. That's a great place to start. But also there is my website, love101ministries.com, and also Instagram or Facebook, Love 101 Ministries. Either one of those are great places as well. And if you want to join us live, you can find us once a month. You can join us at Love 101 Ministries on Facebook or on YouTube.
Before we wrap up this episode, here are Des and I's 3 takeaways that we can incorporate into our work and our life.
So I really loved when Jasmine introduced the concept of heart set. So thinking about that, maybe not versus mindset, but how does heart set integrate in with our mindset? And what stands out for me around heart set is how we reflect that love toward ourselves, but also how we use that to serve others, maybe having a greater understanding of people, understanding what are their drivers and what really matters to them.
That's a good takeaway. Where is your heart set? I would say number 2 for me is how she described her love practice when she said it's an intentional ordering of my life around love. And if we reflect upon that, even if we just look at our day of what is my intentional ordering of love, both in how I show up for myself, how I show up for other people, the activities that I'm doing, are these activities that cultivate more love, or do they get me in a pissy mood? Am I adding in activities, that like, oh, I'm going to get a massage, I'm going to go hang out with friends, I'm going to have a good dinner. I think that reflection to me is truly living consciously. And I love her definition of living consciously with love at the center, that intentional ordering of love in my life. Very cool.
Yeah, that really, really stood out for me as well, Amy. And I'm going to springboard off that and just reiterate for folks, if you want to jot this down, Jasmine talked about loving as a way to practice love. And so the L is listen. And I love that she said, and look again, like just thinking about our awareness and how we can be more inclusive. The O is open. The V is value and even like vulnerability, which is pivotal in terms of having really loving relationships. The I is the inner work. What are the things that we can do for our inner work and illuminating ourselves and others? And is nurture. How do we nurture love in our lives? And G is gift and goodness. And I'm going to take a little bit of liberty and add a third G. And the word grace came up for me. Extending grace to yourself first, which allows you to extend that to others.
Thanks for listening to the Conscious Habit Podcast. If you dug this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And if you're into this consciousness thing, if you like this conversation and you want to meet more like-minded people, head on over to Facebook and join the Conscious Habit community. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.